I've always thought of the lake cabin as more than just wood and nails. It's where summers were measured by the sound of waves against the dock, and winters by the hush of snowfall blanketing the evergreens. My grandfather built the place in the late 1950s, back when this stretch of shoreline was little more than raw wilderness. The road was gravel then, twisting through dense pines and maple groves, leading to a clearing where the cabin sat tucked just close enough to the water that you could fall asleep to the gentle lap of waves. I didn't live there full time. Life in the city had its pull, with work and deadlines that swallowed most of my weekdays. But whenever I could escape, I made the drive to the cabin. To me, the old place wasn't just a retreat. It was a reminder of roots, of sweat-stained shirts, and calloused hands that had built something meant to last. I kept the land cleared and the dock in good repair, knowing that each swing of the hammer echoed the effort my grandparents had put in decades before. But time changes landscapes. What was once remote wilderness began to shift under the pressure of new money and new ideas. Across the lake, development sprouted like weeds. First came a string of luxury cottages, each one boasting gleaming windows and imported stone facades. Then came the paved roads, the tennis courts, the artificial landscaping designed to tame what nature had already perfected. And finally, the HOAs. They appeared with their glossy brochures and hollow promises of community harmony. The latest one, Lakeview Heights, crept right up to the ridge beyond my cabin. It had all the trimmings, a guarded gate, a glossy clubhouse, and neighbors who wielded bylaws like weapons. I didn't think much of it at first. My family's land wasn't part of their territory. Different tax map, different zoning, a line of boundary markers buried deep into the soil decades before. I figured they'd stay on their side and I'd stay on mine. That assumption shattered the spring I rolled up to open the cabin for the season. The gravel driveway crunched under my tires, familiar and reassuring. But when I pulled into the clearing, something was wrong. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks. Parked dead center on my lot was a massive RV. White and shiny, it towered over the cabin like some modern beast dropped into a rustic landscape. Its slide-outs were extended, lawn chairs set up neatly in a semicircle around a portable fire pit that sat square on my driveway gravel. It wasn't just a vehicle. It was a statement. The door of the RV swung open before I even cut the engine. Out stepped a woman in oversized sunglasses and a perfectly styled blonde bob that didn't move with the breeze. She waved as though she'd been waiting for me, her manicured hand glittering with rings. It took me half a second to place her. She was from the HOA across the ridge. I'd seen her at the clubhouse during one of their open houses. Her name was Linda, though around the lake everyone quietly called her Karen. The kind of woman who turned rules into weapons and politeness into a performance. She didn't look apologetic. Quite the opposite. She beamed like she had just gifted me something. My pulse quickened as the weight of it sank in. Someone had rolled an RV onto my family's land, settled in like it was a campsite, and thought nothing of it. The air was thick with the smell of gasoline mixed with pine sap. Somewhere nearby a loon called across the water, its voice haunting and distant, as if echoing my disbelief. It wasn't just the RV. Music drifted from speakers hidden under the awning, tinny pop beats clashing with the natural rhythm of the woods. A string of tiki lights ran from the RV to a makeshift pole near the driveway. The entire place looked less like private property and more like a cheap summer festival ground. I got out of my truck slowly, gravel crunching under my boots. The old familiar land suddenly felt foreign, violated. Every nail in the cabin, every board of the dock, every tree that had stood guard over decades, it all seemed to watch in silent protest. My stomach twisted with equal parts anger and disbelief. I didn't need to ask whose idea this was. Karen radiated entitlement like heat off asphalt. She was the type who treated every unspoken inch of ground as hers to claim if no one stopped her. The type who thought HOA bylaws extended past gates and fences into the very air. My lot to her must have looked like an empty square on a chessboard waiting to be seized. The sun was beginning to dip, casting the lake in gold and fire. It should have been beautiful, but all I could see was the hulking RV and the smug tilt of Karen's sunglasses as she surveyed her little kingdom. My jaw tightened. The place my grandfather had built for peace had been hijacked. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't going to be just a polite misunderstanding. This was going to be a battle, and like the waves that refused to stop lapping against the shore, I wasn't about to back down. The first night set the tone. I tried to tell myself maybe it was temporary. Maybe by morning the RV would be gone, the lawn chairs folded and the gravel driveway mine again. But when dawn came, pale light spilling across the lake and catching on the water's surface, the RV was still there, its generator humming steadily like a machine that had no intention of leaving. Smoke curled from a portable grill, and the air that usually smelled of pine and lake water was now thick with charred meat and gasoline. I made coffee on the cabin's old percolator, staring through the window at the spectacle outside. Strangers had gathered. Half a dozen people lounging in camp chairs, red plastic cups in hand, their laughter drifting through the thin morning air. My dock, once the quiet stage for loon calls and evening fishing, now hosted a pair of teenagers snapping selfies, their sneakers clattering on the weathered boards. Every ripple of the water seemed to mock me, reflecting the unnatural glow of tiki lights still strung from the RV to a nearby pine. The music started mid-morning, loud enough that the windows of the cabin rattled in their frames. It was the kind of overproduced pop that doesn't belong in the wilderness, each bass line clashing against the natural silence. I stepped outside, gravel crunching under my boots, the sun warming the back of my neck. Karen spotted me instantly. She raised her cup in a mock toast, her oversized sunglasses flashing like mirrors. She looked entirely at home, as if she'd purchased the land outright. The hours dragged. Cars began arriving, tires grinding my driveway into ruts, filling the clearing with a row of shiny SUVs and sedans. At one point, a man I'd never seen before wandered up to my cabin porch, beer in hand, looking for the restroom. The casual entitlement was staggering, as if my private retreat had transformed into a public park overnight. My stomach tightened with every unfamiliar face that crossed the property line, every careless boot that trampled grass my grandfather had once cleared by hand. I tried reason first. Quiet words with Karen, a reminder that this was private land, that boundaries existed. She smiled with practiced dismissal, the kind of smile that erased anything inconvenient to her narrative. "Just a weekend," her tone implied. "You'll survive." Then she turned back to her crowd, her laugh echoing across the lot. By Saturday afternoon, frustration curdled into anger. I walked down the gravel road to the sheriff's office number posted at the general store. The deputy on call listened patiently, his voice steady but cautious. Technically, yes, it was trespassing, but technically also these were neighbors. A warning first, he suggested. A chance to resolve it peacefully. I hung up, the weight of helplessness pressing heavy on my chest. Back at the cabin, the chaos only grew. A sound system had been dragged onto the grass, wires snaking across the ground like invasive roots. The music now shook the very air, drowning out birdsong, the laughter of loons, the natural heartbeat of the lake. My dock groaned under the weight of strangers who treated it like a stage for their party photos. And all the while, Karen sat in her lawn chair, wide-brimmed sun hat shading her face, sipping sangria as though she presided over her own private resort. Night fell with no reprieve. The tiki lights glowed against the dark pines, casting garish color onto bark that should have stood in quiet shadow. Laughter carried across the water, punctuated by the crackle of the fire pit. The cabin walls, once a shield against the world, now only amplified the sound. Sleep was impossible. I lay awake listening to the relentless thump of bass and the murmur of voices too close, too invasive. Every creak of the floorboards beneath me reminded me of my grandfather, of the nights he must have stood in this same cabin and heard only wind and water. Sunday morning came, and with it the departure of most of the party. Cars rolled away, engines fading into distance. For a moment I thought maybe the nightmare was ending. But the RV remained, its hulking form squatting in the center of the lot like an insult carved into the land. Karen and her husband lounged in camp chairs, their posture relaxed, their smiles infuriating. They weren't in a hurry. They weren't leaving. By Monday, I understood this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was deliberate. The RV was more than just an eyesore. It was a claim, a planted flag. Karen had decided my lot was useful to her, and she had no intention of moving until it suited her. The arrogance was breathtaking. The helplessness burned. But as I stood on the cabin porch, the lake calm and glassy in the morning sun, a thought began to take root. There were rules in this county. There were laws stronger than entitlement. And if Karen believed HOA bylaws made her untouchable, maybe those same bylaws could become the very thing that brought her down. By Tuesday morning, my frustration had crystallized into something sharper, something that felt a lot like resolve. I sat at the old wooden table in the cabin, the surface scarred with years of family meals and card games, a laptop glowing before me. I scrolled through county ordinances, cross-referenced property maps, and dug deeper than I'd ever cared to into the dry language of local codes. Each line was a weapon waiting to be unsheathed. It didn't take long to find what I needed. Parking an RV on private property without the owner's permission wasn't just rude. It was legally trespassing, and, more importantly, towable. My pulse quickened as I highlighted the section and reread it. But the real gem came when I stumbled upon Lakeview Heights' HOA bylaws. They were posted publicly, a glossy PDF meant to show off their sense of order. Page after page outlined rules with obsessive precision. Lawn heights, fence colors, pet restrictions. And then there it was, Section 14. Subsection C. Any member who stored or occupied a vehicle on non-HOA property without explicit permission was subject to immediate removal at their own expense, plus fines up to $5,000. The irony made me laugh out loud, the sound startling in the quiet cabin. Karen herself had signed those rules into being, her name listed as committee chair on the very document now condemning her. She'd wielded the HOA like a weapon for so long, and now the blade was turning in her hands. By late morning, I called the sheriff again. This time my voice was calm, measured. I cited the ordinance, quoted the bylaws, and told him I was ready to sign the trespass complaint. The deputy's tone shifted instantly. Professional, direct. "Sounds like you've given her more than enough warnings," he said. "We'll send a truck." When the tow truck rumbled up the gravel drive 2 hours later, its engine growled like justice made tangible. The driver climbed out, assessed the RV, and gave a low whistle. He nodded, no hesitation. Chains clinked as he prepared the rig, the metallic sound sharp in the morning air. The RV door flew open before the first hook was set. Karen burst out, wide-brimmed hat askew, sunglasses nowhere in sight. Her voice cut across the clearing, shrill and incredulous. She flailed her arms as though she could physically ward off the inevitable. "You can't tow this. This is a private gathering." The deputy handed her the paperwork, his tone steady as stone. "Ma'am, you are trespassing. The property owner has signed the complaint. And by your own HOA bylaws, this vehicle is unauthorized." Her face turned crimson, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Her husband tried to interject, but the deputy's stare silenced him. Around us, the pines stood tall and silent, indifferent witnesses to her unraveling. The tow chains tightened with a metallic groan, the RV shuddering as it was lifted from its stolen perch. I watched, heart pounding, as the machine rolled forward, dragging Karen's kingdom of entitlement out of my lot. Gravel sprayed, chains rattled, and just like that, the invasion ended. For the first time in days, I could breathe again. 2 days later, my phone rang. Her voice was smaller now, stripped of bravado. She stammered through the numbers. $1,900 for the tow, another $5,000 fine from her own HOA. She begged me to intervene, to talk to the board, to undo what had been done. I let the silence stretch, listening to the faint tremor in her voice. Then slowly, I reminded her of the warnings, of the maps, of the words she had dismissed with a smug smile. "This time," I said, "the rules you worship did their job." Then I hung up. In the weeks that followed, word of Karen's downfall spread through Lakeview Heights. The queen of the HOA, once untouchable, now whispered about in chuckles and sideways glances. Her reign ended not with a dramatic vote, but with humiliation so public she had no choice but to step down. The board announced she wanted to spend more time with family, but everyone knew the truth. She had been dethroned by her own arrogance. Now when I drive up the gravel road and the cabin comes into view, the lot is empty once more. The dock stretches quietly into the water, the loons call at dusk, and the air smells of pine and lake water instead of gasoline. The cabin feels like itself again, untouched, unspoiled. I keep the towing receipt in a frame on the cabin wall, a reminder that justice doesn't always need to be loud or violent. Sometimes it just needs to be patient, thorough, and poetic. And if anyone ever tries to test the boundaries again, I'll be ready. Because this land isn't just mine. It's a legacy. And legacies don't bow to entitlement.